This is the podcast on Banquo, a character whom I would argue hits a bit of a dead end halfway through, and it's perhaps worth asking why this might be. Now, when we first meet Macbeth and Banquo, we meet them both together, and it's established that they are both equals. They're both thanes, and there's no suggestion that Macbeth is ranked higher than Banquo. So when Macbeth tells the witches that to be king stands not within the prospect of belief, he's talking about his own social status as a thane. It doesn't seem to lend itself to being a king. So when we first meet the characters, they both appear quite humble, and they don't consider themselves within the line of succession. And so this is our starting point, and this is what we use to judge the characters later when Macbeth starts to become much more ambitious. Now, to go back to some historical context for a moment, Banquo appears in Holinshed's Chronicles, which is a key source for Macbeth. He's now thought to be a mythical character. It's not thought that there was a real historical figure called Banquo. But King James thought that there was, and he thought that he was a descendant of that historical Banquo. And this explains why the character's been changed from Holinshed's Chronicles. In the Chronicles, Banquo is an accomplice to the murder along with Macbeth, which would obviously be unacceptable for Shakespeare to present if he's then going to be an ancestor of King James I. It would be unacceptable for him to present an ancestor of the king as a murderer. And it also explains why it's Banquo's sons who benefit from the prophecy, not Banquo himself. We know there wasn't a historical King Banquo, but you can leave the sons in place and let them form the line of succession that will eventually lead to King James I, at least in theory. And it gives us a reason why the Fleance plotline remains unresolved. Fleance disappears in the middle of the play. We know he escapes the murderers, but that aspect of the plot is never resolved. It doesn't seem possible, or it seems difficult to explain how you could insert Fleance into the line of succession without him murdering somebody himself. Some of the films of the play have gone down that road. But again, that's one of those things that couldn't have been presented historically to King James I, so it's just conveniently left unanswered. Now, Act 1, Scene 3 is the really important scene featuring Banquo. It's the one where he and Macbeth encounter the witches and hear the prophecy. And the approach, or the attitude that Banquo takes towards the witches changes in the scene. He seems quite positive about them at first. He asks Macbeth why he's so afraid of the witches when they seem to be telling him good things. And then later he tells them that he's fairly indifferent to them, who neither beg nor fear your favours nor your hate. So he doesn't like or dislike them. He's not afraid of them or particularly tempted by them. So he seems neutral, if not casual. But then a bit later, he starts referring to them as the devil. What can the devil speak true? And he calls them the instruments of darkness. So, what you might want to do is this. Stop the video and come up with an explanation of Banquo's character that incorporates all this evidence. Because that's what you have to do, and when we talk about using alternative interpretations, we don't mean you should just contradict yourself for its own sake. What we mean is, you are trying to form an interpretation of this character that is consistent and that follows the evidence, but sometimes that evidence is not consistent, and you have to try to find a way of explaining the character that allows for all this evidence to exist even when it's sometimes contradictory. So stop the video and do it now. Okay, So here's what I've come up with as a possible interpretation of the scene. That change in Banquo's attitude happens as the prophecy starts to come true. So at the beginning of the scene, when he's very casual towards them, he has no reason to be concerned. And he has quite a jokey attitude towards them. He talks about them having beards, he talks about them looking ugly, and there's no reason for him to take any other approach at that time. We only see the change in Banquo when Ross brings news of Banquo's promotion. And that's the first indication that there's something more to the witches, and it's also the first time we see a more serious attitude in Banquo. So it might be that his initial attitude, rather than being a contradiction, is just down to him not seeing any reason to take the witches seriously. And then as new evidence comes to light, his attitude changes because of that. That gives us an interpretation of Banquo's character that allows for this different evidence. Now in Act 3, Scene 1, jumping forward a bit to after the murder of Duncan, we see that Banquo clearly has suspicions. Thou hast it all now, king, caudle, glamest all, as the weird women promised, and I fear thou play'st most foully for it. So Banquo clearly believes that Macbeth has committed some dark act in order to gain the things that he's gained. This implies he doesn't think the witch's prophecy could have come true all by itself. And one of the key themes of the play is the way Macbeth attempts to pick and choose which parts of the prophecies come true and which parts don't. But Banquo certainly thinks that Macbeth has done something actively in order to make the prophecy come true. He doesn't know that. We, the audience, know that that's absolutely correct. But Banquo doesn't know it. He just suspects it. But his suspicions come to nothing because he is then murdered in order for Macbeth to tie up that particular loose end and prevent part of the prophecy from coming true. The important thing to note here is that Macbeth doesn't kill Banquo because Banquo's onto him. Macbeth has no idea Banquo's onto him. Macbeth kills Banquo because of that part of the prophecy that says that Fleance will take over as part of the line of succession from Macbeth. So Banquo's suspicions, although he voices them, don't come to anything, which is what I meant when I described him at the very beginning as a narrative dead end. And that just leaves the haunting of the feast, Act 3, Scene 4, which is the last scene to feature Banquo in any way. He has no direct role in the scene, he doesn't say anything, nobody other than Macbeth can see him, and some adaptations of it leave him out completely so that it is just Macbeth hallucinating. But there are some interesting questions related to him. I mean, the key one for me is, why is it Banquo's ghost and not Duncan's? Of course, he's betrayed his friend, but that was also true of Duncan. Banquo seems to be a good man, but Duncan's probably better. So what does Banquo have over Duncan that's going to affect Macbeth so much? There isn't really a clear answer to this. It's up to your interpretation. I might suggest it has something to do with Macbeth taking more of an active step to prevent parts of the prophecy coming true. He is trying to take control of something that was always out of his control. And it's that, rather than the act of murder itself, that's the important factor. But that's by no means a definitive interpretation. There's plenty of others that you might be able to suggest that would be equally good or better. And it's worth pointing out as well that this is the last time we see the familiar power dynamic between Macbeth and his wife, in which his wife is the stronger character than Macbeth. After this, we start to see that seesaw effect where Macbeth hardens and starts to take more of his own initiative, while Lady Macbeth weakens and is driven insane by her own guilt. So, to finish up, in some respects, Banquo doesn't have much to do in the story. His death It shows that Macbeth is a traitor to his friends, but we knew that already. Duncan was his friend, Duncan trusted him. He's just one example among many. Banquo has to be there, and he has to be an essentially good character if the argument that Shakespeare was trying to flatter James I is going to hold up. And many of the plot threads surrounding him are brought to a sudden stop with his death. So, for example, the suspicions he voices about whether Macbeth has committed murder himself comes to nothing. And after that, Macduff and Malcolm take over as the main opposition to Macbeth. And that's part of the evidence for the theory that the play that we know as Macbeth might actually be a cut-down version of the one that Shakespeare actually wrote.